Welcome, everybody, to the Sentinels of Liberty podcast. I am your host, Redbeard, the maniacal madman that is behind the camera here, trying to direct this podcast the best that I can. See, English is hard some days. But thank you so much for joining me this evening, taking some time out of your day. I really, really appreciate it. Tonight, we're going to have a pretty interesting podcast episode. I'm going to be doing this slightly different, but still adding a little bit of my twist and flair and kind of some of my randomness to it. But I'm going to go at this episode a little bit differently than I have some or all of my previous episodes, which is from a disposition of trying to hopefully provide a little bit of insight, like focused insight and perspective as it pertains to the subject matter of tonight. Now, what is the subject matter of tonight? Well, as you can tell kind of from the heading or the title, it is Washington's Warnings, Entangling Alliances. And so we're going to be looking at what George Washington warned about in his farewell address and some of the key points and some contemporary points that can be seen today as to how entangling alliances are occurring, have occurred, and what does this all break down and mean? A little bit of housekeeping real quick. On Saturday, I am going to be having T.C. Pearson on the podcast. And T.C. is a former law enforcement officer, and he brings a pretty unique perspective to the issue of law enforcement and how it relates to contemporary issues today, the militarization. And so I think having that perspective that from his point of view is going to be really helpful. And he also has, I believe, if I get the podcast wrong, I do apologize, DC, but I believe his YouTube is the Minnesota Black Robe Regiment. If you haven't seen any of his content, maybe go check him out. And see if you like what he's doing over there. He's going to be my guest for Saturday, and I think that's going to be a really good episode and conversation we're going to have. So, what is the conversation? So I'm going to start out with this, and I apologize if I glance down. I am referencing notes. I don't remember everything up here the best that I used to, so you'll have to forgive me. So look, as it pertains to Washington's farewell address, it wasn't simply just like a goodbye, right? It wasn't something saying like, "Hey, I'm leaving. This is my opinions, my perspectives in entirety." But there was a meaningful, almost a contemporarily prophetic point behind all of these things that he talks about, right? It was a warning. He foresaw that foreign entanglements, favoritism, hatred toward other nations would corrupt America's politics, enslave us to foreign interests, and overwhelmingly erode liberty here at home. And I think when you consider that that point of view, and you look at all of the arguments that he kind of lays out in his farewell address, we can see that, yes, contemporarily today, this is pretty much almost exactly the course that we're on. Now, before we get too far in the discussion, I want to start off with a few key quotes that I think are going to be a really good primer for what we're about to head into. The first quote is, "Against the insidious wiles of foreign influence, the jealousy of a free people ought to be constantly awake," which means, look, it's incumbent upon us to be essentially the sentinels, right, of our republic, the sentinels of our liberty, and being awake, being focused, being aware of the things that are going on, especially as it pertains to foreign influence, entanglements, and everything that comes with that. Another quote that I really, really like is, "Excessive partiality for one foreign nation and excessive dislike of another," is another good point that he talks about. And I think we've seen this especially today as it pertains to Ukraine or Russia or even Israel or Iran. We see this disparity that takes place, and I think it's something that is going to really become more and more as time goes on and undoing for us. One extra quote that I really want to use as a primer for this evening is It is our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world, which means, look, like we should not be having permanent alliances. Why? Because they have a tendency to drag us into a lot of trouble and a lot of undue situations that we otherwise wouldn't be dragged into had we just had a amicable kind of an arm's length relationship with these countries. Doesn't mean you have to be against that country, doesn't mean you have to be for that country, but you could still have a reasonable relationship with that country without having to have a permanent alliance, which ultimately mitigates any damage or potential issues that come with that relationship. So I just want to kind of add in here as well. Washington warned that favoritism, hatred, and alliances would lead to endless wars abroad and tyranny at home. Very, very true. These weren't abstract musings. One could say that, it was almost kind of prophetic when you look at all of the things that ensued thereafter his farewell address. And you look at a lot of contemporary things. I mean, he wasn't wrong. It's almost as if he kind of had a look into the future and was able to anticipate where it is that the people that we elected to go to their positions were bound to go, and in all of the different situations that surround that. Now, there's a couple pieces of the core discussion this evening, and I want to start with modern entanglements. Okay, let's start with evaluating NATO. A permanent alliance dragging America into European wars, something that unfortunately has not been fruitful for us. It's been kind of one of those inconvenient or rather convenient, I guess, if you're a politician, relationships that really kind of just excuse us into one way or another, and to make the argument that, yes, we have to continue militarizing. Yes, we have to continue funding. We have to continue doing all these things, and more especially into European wars. The exact opposite of Washington's advice to avoid permanent attachments. So look, like, I think this is a great example that NATO has become a permanent attachment, has become a very degrading permanent attachment. It's not something that we should be involved in. It's certainly not something that we should ever have been party to, but nonetheless, we are a part of it. And so we have to start to recognize what this does to us and where it's going to put us in the world stage as time continues to go on. And I hate to say it, but we are in a lesser position because of these permanent alliances. And when you look at the amount of money, the amount of weapons, and the defenseless nature that it not only kind of puts us in due to the exhausting of resources, but the overwhelming, how would I say, dependent nature that many other countries involved in NATO are on us, it creates a very precarious situation. Now, one of the other points that I want to get to in this core segment or discussion here in the modern entanglements is Israel. Okay, Israel. When we look at this entanglement, we see things like unquestionable aid, lobbying influence, and anti-BDS laws that punish Americans for dissent. I mean, something that is absolutely egregious and reprehensible, and something that is supposed to be a constitutional republic, a republic that is built on the principles of liberty and freedom. And yet here we are with things like anti-BDS laws, the overwhelming amount of lobbying influence, and the unquestioned aid. It just doesn't end. Which is also, you see a direct violation of free speech as it ultimately, is pursuant to things like the anti-BDS laws. So I think that's a very, very interesting point there as it pertains to Israel. And it's something that we should focus on more and more as we go into the future, and how this is going to shape and ultimately change the nature of our relationship, not only with our own government, but how that relationship between our government and Israel is going to change the foundation and or the fabric of our own country. Ukraine is another point that I want to hit on. Endless aid packages rushed through Congress, dissenters smeared as pro-Russia. Again, we have another situation to where we're just sending copious amounts of stuff. And I understand that Vance came out recently and said, well, we're not going to do this. And I believe Trump also said that as well. But look, I'm here to tell you, I'll believe it when I see it. And even after they're gone, who's to say that this machine, this this supply chain machine is not just going to start right back up to Ukraine and continue to inflate and cause more problems. Notwithstanding the fact that numerous Americans and many other people have been put on lists by Ukraine. Ukraine has come in and they've tried to influence people within our government apparatus to go after or to silence people who would dissent about the war, to point out inconvenient facts or whatever the case might be. It's a very, very insidious cycle and situation that we really have to pay a lot of attention to. Other commitments also would include entanglements across Asia, the Middle East, that keep America locked into cycles of war and instability. This is another thing that we see very, very often. And oftentimes we almost kind of excuse ourselves into these entanglements, into these conflicts, and into these conflagrations that we don't need to be in. We involve ourselves incessantly in these situations. And it not only puts us at peril due to things like blowback, but it also pretty much destroys and rapes and steals all of our treasure, our ability to defend ourselves, and in some cases, our blood. We send our people over to some of these places that die for these causes. And really, I mean, they're causes that we have no reason to be involved in whatsoever. I would actually argue that in most causes, we have no reason to be involved in whatsoever. Again, so many of these situations, I would challenge many people to find a legitimate national security threat or a national security reason as to why we have to be here. And it has to be strong. It can't just be, well, we think that, this is going to be a threat, or, well, we've seen this over here. No, you have to explain yourself and cite a legitimate reason as to why we have to do this. And unfortunately, when you have entangling alliances, it just makes it easier to go without the reasoning or the explanation and just say, well, we have a commitment to this country. That's not the way this is supposed to be. That's not going to fly, and it's certainly not going to pass my sniff test. There is a warning by Washington, of which he says, the nation which indulges towards another a habitual hatred or habitual fondness is in some degree a slave. So what he's saying here is, when we become too fond or too hateful of another country, we essentially enslave ourselves to the whims or the musings of these other countries. We put ourselves at the behest of these other countries, whether you think that that's the case or not. You, to some degree, you do. And I think it's a very prophetic warning by Washington himself as we look at contemporary examples, some of, the few that I've already put out there. And I would simply ask everybody to take some time and really consider, like, of all the places that we fund, all the places we send weapons to, all the places we send these quote unquote peacekeepers to, I would like to kind of have you guys sit back and kind of analyze, okay, what is the reasoning? What is the rationale? And is it contingent on the fact that we have an overwhelming hatred or favoritism towards one country or another? And I would be willing to argue in support of Washington's point that that's almost entirely the case every single time as it stands today, and certainly as it has stood in history. So I think that was a really, really good portion to start with. And I hope that I helped kind of define the image or the picture that we're trying to go for tonight. And I hope that was a reasonable or rational explanation of, this entanglement argument. So I would like to take this and continue to build up steam as we move into the next portion, which is insidious domestic influence. And I think it's a great way to kind of explain it, because it's almost as if you have these tendrils, or you have these long fingers that reach into the very apparatus of our government. It becomes very insidious, very usurious. It becomes very manipulative in order to try and garner an outcome that these countries that rely on our dependence, or rather that rely on our entanglement or our alliance, or our habitual hatred, if you will, or favoritism towards one country of another. I think you start to see that really take root here. And so when we look at insidious domestic influence, we see things like foreign entanglements don't just shape foreign policy, they warp our institution. And I think that is a huge point that we have to take the time to actually sit back, really evaluate, okay, where are some of these entanglements? Where is some of this influence being had? And what institutions are being warped? And I would argue that if you look at the lawmaking area, if you look at the decision making that occurs, and you look at the way that we go about dealing with other countries, I think you can certainly see the argument for the warping of our institutions. In conjunction, you have Congress. Lawmakers who question Israel are called anti-Semitic. Those who question Ukraine aid are accused of disloyalty. And this is another fantastic point that you really, really start to see. It's a very insidious talking point used to discredit anybody who even questions the idea that, hey, maybe, just maybe, if you follow me here, we shouldn't be supporting other countries in their endeavors in the way that we are. They should certainly not be permanent alliances. At best, a reasonable, rational relationship that doesn't permanently affix us to an alliance that drags us into all the chaos, discontent, and other issues that other countries might express or involve us in via their mistakes, their misdeeds, and their misgivings. So I think that's great. That's a great point. And I think it's very interesting when you look at people who question where the aid goes, where the support goes. We have certainly seen this contemporarily, especially recently, as it pertains to things like aid and lawmakers who even question that narrative. The presidency policy is often tilted towards the interests of foreign allies. Overwhelmingly, again, I hate to say it, but when you look at whether it's this presidency or the other presidency, we do see this tilt and this fondness, right? This fondness towards these allies, and the fact that, like, well, if we don't support them, then all will be lost. That's kind of the tone that we see here. If we don't support them, then they're our greatest ally, right? Then what does that mean for us? Well, all it means for us is we just don't want to get involved in something that, one, doesn't fundamentally involve us, but at the same time, it keeps us much safer because of the fact that we are now not creating needless enemies. We're not involving ourselves in conflicts or conflagrations that don't require us to be there. You're starting to see things like economics and military implications that wouldn't necessarily be there if we weren't getting involved in the issues of another quote unquote ally, right? So there's a lot of different takeaways, but there has always been this fondness by the presidency to tilt towards the interests of foreign allies. And I think that it is a very detrimental disposition, especially for the presidency to have. Legislation. Another fantastic point. We have things like the anti-BDS laws that violate the First Amendment. Ukraine funding bills are pushed through without little debate. And I would argue that you could carry this type of situation, you could flip-flop them, and you could see that when people talk about Ukraine or the aid for Ukraine, that they're smeared, as it was mentioned earlier, saying that, oh, you're pro-Russia, you're pro-Russia. It doesn't make a person pro or against for simply looking out for the interests of the United States of America, or for your own country for that matter, not just the United States, but, Britain's looking out for Britain, Germans looking out for Germans. It doesn't make you a bad person, and it certainly doesn't make you culpable to the support of another nation if you're like, hey, maybe, just maybe, we should keep our supplies, our money, our reserves to help us. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But ultimately, what you see is you do see these assaults on free speech. You see these assaults on the First Amendment, and you see these assaults as it pertains to, the interests of Americans or the populace of whatever country. When you just see these bills rammed through without very little debate, you have only a handful of dissenting opinions, again, of which these people are overwhelmingly lambasted and attacked, using every word in the book against these people to make them look like they're anti-patriotic, they're anti-American, or whatever the case might be. And so I think when you break these things down and you look at these, insidious types of influence and the way that they're manipulative, I think it paints a very disturbing picture as to how things work. Now, Washington also has a warning pertaining to this. Real patriots who may resist the intrigues of the favorite are liable to become suspected and odious, well its tools and dupes usurp the applause and confidence of the people to surrender their interest. And I think that's a very timely quote. It was very well said, and I think it's very applicable to the contemporary setting today. So I think that was a very good note to end that portion on. And I hope you guys and gals were able to kind of get something out of that previous segment there. Now, going on to the next point or the next segment of what I'm trying to articulate here, I want to take a look at U.S. bases and the empire, as it were. The U.S. maintains 750 military bases in 80 plus countries, 750 plus military bases in 80 plus countries. These bases don't defend liberty, they expand empire. That's all you've ever seen throughout history. Anytime that they justify, we need a base here, we need a base here, we need a base here. Look, it's not for your liberty. You are not defending your national interest. You're expanding the empire, which is divesting from the national interest. It's divesting from the actual liberty because it excuses this idea that you can have a tripwire and, oops, well, our base got attacked, so I guess we have to go to war. And it goes beyond that. It's a drain on American resources. It undermines the sovereignty of host nations. And I've said this numerous times before, time and time again. It invites hostility and resentment, certainly by other nations, and at times, even the host nations, I would argue, and many times by the host nations, but it guarantees U.S. involvement in foreign conflicts. Again, look, this notion that it's supposed to bolster our national defense when it really acts as a tripwire to get us engaged into foreign involvements and conflicts, really, like, it's degrading to our defense. It's degrading to our sovereignty. It's degrading to our security as a nation. And it creates more issues, and it creates the likelihood of a reciprocated attack or the likelihood of blowback down the road that ultimately we could have avoided or at least mitigated to a very drastic feat if we didn't have bases all over the place, just peppered across the globe. And there's a key point. There's a key takeaway here. If foreign bases truly made us safe, America would be the most secure nation in history. Instead, they spread us thin, provoke blowback, as I mentioned, and increase the risk of war, which we have seen. Right now, we have two Aegis systems. I believe there's one in that was set up in Romania. I think it was Romania, and one that was set up in Poland. Now, these Aegis systems have the ability to use, I believe, the Tomahawk missiles. Now, what is the significance about this, right? What is the significance about this system is Tomahawk missiles can take a nuclear payload, right? And so when we look at this type of situation, what does that do? It increases the risk of war. And why is it that we're putting these systems in other countries that aren't our responsibility? Those should be protecting American shores, not the shores, not the perimeters, and certainly not the borders of other countries. Other countries need to learn to support themselves. They need to learn how to defend themselves. And I'm not saying that there can't be some type of relationship or a trade exchange, but in the end of the day, the responsibility of the government that we elect, that we put in, that are supposed to represent us, is ultimately the safety and defense of us. And by spreading these bases all over the place, you're negating and degrading that responsibility by stretching us thin, by putting out there the potential to provoke or be caught up in another foreign conflict that we don't need to be involved in, and ultimately creates a dangerous precedent moving forward. And so I think that's a very, very astute point there to make. And I think it's something that should be echoed time and time and time and again whenever we look at this idea that, oh, we're going to set up a few more bases, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. We need to take a strong, hard look at this and take a step back and make sure that the consideration that we're making is actually doesn't line up with actually securing this country. And I would argue that it does not. Now, I kind of want to round this off here, and I want to kind of hit some closing points, if you will. Let's look at Washington's outlook perspective, or as some might say, like perhaps a prophetic look into the future. Washington warned that excessive hatred or fondness for other nations would enslave us. Again, we're hitting another a point that we spoke about, but it's also a very contemporary example of what it has been doing to us. I mean, you look at how we are so beholden to our hatred or to our fondness to so many countries that it's becoming impossible to have dealings with some and to break away from an abusive or usurious or usurpacious relationship from others. He said, foreign influence was one of the most baneful foes of Republican government. And this is true, right? When you have these influences that come in, they do become very degrading. They become very insidious. And as such, it becomes a foe. It becomes an enemy. It becomes a situation that should be disgusting to the American, especially as it pertains to our security, to our defense, and to our cohesion as a country. Because when you have these influences that come in, now you have a situation where the people become less heard. They become liable to legislating in favor, right? Creating legislation that's in favor to supporting these nations, or excusing legislation of saying, well, this is going to make you safer because of X, Y, or Z. Whatever enemy it is that they decide is the flavor of the day, they can use that to go forth and to ultimately press it upon you. So I think that's another great point. And now, when we look at something and when we look at another portion of this perspective, today, NATO, Israel, Ukraine, and hundreds of bases abroad are living proof of his warnings. They are. If you go back and you look at the arguments and the points that Washington has made, and I hope that I've been able to clearly or effectively articulate some of his major points here, you can see that these things, they are examples of the very things that he told us not to do, the very things that would really devolve us and degrade our republic, or rather build the empire, if you will. And these things become very contradicting to who we are as Americans, our foundation, our principles, and ultimately it becomes very degrading to our liberty. I want to go over a closing segment here for you guys and gals. Liberty doesn't collapse all at once. It erodes piece by piece. I think that's very timely. I think it's very contemporary, but it's also a historical point that I think holds up when you look at history and you look at how the collapse of liberty has occurred. And when you talk about entangling alliances, this is no exception at all. It dies in the name of security. It dies when loyalty to a foreign nation overrides loyalty to America. It dies when dissent is silenced and patriots are vilified. This is fundamental to the death blows that would assail or assault liberty. Now, you've heard me argue liberty does live on with each and every single person. I believe that flame is in every single person. But in our time, at least, or in the time that we exist, it has the ability to be beaten to death, if you will, and it has the ability to be horrendously and reprehensibly degraded. And I think that these points are no different to that perspective. Washington's charge was clear. Vigilance is the duty of a free people, and I would say a very liberty-oriented people. It is our duty to be vigilant against these baneful foes, and these individuals that would seek to come in, usurp our liberty, usurp our foundation, our principles, and who we are as Americans. And more importantly, to my friends over in Europe, it is usurping of who you are as Germans, as Britons, as Italians, whatever you are. You guys need to, more than ever, especially, be recognizing of this. And I know that the road is hard over there. You guys are really going through it. But I think that there are small examples, there's small cracks of light coming through over in Europe with some countries. And I think the list will grow as the day goes on, where there is a discontent for this type of situation. And I really, really hope that that is the case and it continues to carry forth. Now, I have a slight call to action, if you will, here. We must be the sentinels of liberty, resisting entanglements, rejecting tyranny, remembering that America's first duty is to our own liberty, not the ambitions of foreign powers. I think that that is one of the most fundamental core philosophies that our founders ever ever held. We have to be jealous of our liberty. We have to put the we have to put our liberty beyond those of the foreign influence, those of the overwhelming favoritism, the overwhelming hatred, because these things will destroy us as a people. And I think in the end of the day, when you look at the entanglements argument, when you break down what Washington was trying to say, I think we've not only seen this through history, not just with the United States, but so many other countries, but we're seeing it contemporarily here today. So that is kind of my explanation or my breakdown or argument, rather, however you'd like to call it, for or rather pertaining to the conversation of entanglement, as we can kind of analyze it and look at it from what Washington had warned us about, what he had spoken about, and examining some parts of the farewell address that I think were relatively timely. I just want to take a few moments here real quick. I'm not going to take super long. I just want to see some of the comments and have the opportunity to kind of respond to some of the comments here. It's great to see everybody. David, Gene, Centerline Systems, Chuck, it's fantastic to see you. Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. Also, if you really like the show, if you like what you hear, hit the like and subscribe. Share it with your friends and family, get the information out there. And I hope that I have been responsible and careful enough in crafting a show that is worth showing to people around you and your friend group and to your family as well. I try to do the best that I can to put on the best show and provide the best information. So let's go back here and take a look. You know what, Centerline Systems? I accept your apology for being late. It is what it is, man. To be fair, I did start the show just a skosh early. So, I mean, fashionably late. I think you were fashionably late. So I will take it, sir. Net and Wazoo just said folks are only MAGA if they support Israel. Yeah, I mean, it speaks for itself, does it not? I mean, when you look at the situation that comes down to our relationship, I would say our entangling alliance as it pertains to Israel. I mean, this is a man who really is trying to do his best to influence our politicians, to influence the crafting of law and legislation, and ultimately is really railing against the American people that, look, if you're not supporting all of these policies, all of these different things, then, oh, well, you must be anti-Semitic. You must be a terrible person. You're not truly an American if you don't support our greatest ally, right? And so I think when you look at the rhetoric that comes out of his mouth and you look at the actions that are taking place, not only just in Gaza, but in other places where they're actively going in and trying to push their way into various areas of the Middle East, I mean, it kind of speaks for itself. You can only hide so much. And I suspect that the reason he's starting to do more podcasts is because he's getting ready to create another big push for Israel, not just as it pertains to Gaza, but I think, I don't know for sure. I don't know for sure, and I hope I'm wrong, but I think we're going to see things fire up between Israel and Iran again, and I think Israel's really fixing to try and get into a fight, and you know as well as I do that they're going to abuse the entangling alliance that we have with them to drag us into that conflagration, and I am not for it. I am here to tell you I am not for it, but that is a great comment. Good morning, Gene says. I forget, Gene, that you are way ahead of us in the time frame. Good morning to you, sir. Greetings and well wishes from the United States to you. I'm glad to have you here and hanging out with the Sentinels of Liberty. Bring that spirit of rebellion, of liberty with you everywhere you go, brother. Also, kind of thought we had the thing called the First Amendment. Yeah, no, it's amazing when you look at these influences, you look at the entanglements, you look at all of the things that come along with these or with this situation, the amount of influence that they have over legislation, whether it's Israel, Ukraine, or whomever the flavor of the day is, that we just have an overwhelming appeal to nation-wise or person-wise, how much this influence really tends to erode our foundation and the way that our government's supposed to work. I mean, this is why you have so many people that do rally against AIPAC and other institutions, and why they believe that they should be listed as, like foreign actors, if you will, because of the amount of influence. Because when you have people that come over like Netanyahu or like Zelensky, they do their darndest to go in front of Congress, tell them, look, we don't like what they're saying. You need to do something about this. And then a week later, you have something drafted up by either your Senate and House in your state, which some states have done, or by people in Congress at the federal level to try and nullify who you can trade with, who you can work with in terms of business, or what it is that you can say, ultimately trying to control that narrative. And that is detrimental, overwhelmingly detrimental to liberty. It should not stand. And remember, you all, each and every single one of you, are sentinels of liberty. You are here because you care about liberty, and you are charged with the duty to go forth and defend it in the best manner and the best way that you can. And for each of us, that looks different. But in the end of the day, we have a duty and responsibility, not only as Americans, but to Gene and to my other European friends. Look, you have a responsibility to defend the birthright and the liberty that you have in your countries, because there are a lot of countries that have experienced liberty. They are aware of what liberty is, and it's up to you to defend you, your liberty, your people, your families, your communities, and that's the bottom line. So I think when you look at speech and the erosion of speech, we tend to see where that cliff, where the drop over that cliff tends to go. And I'm here to tell you it's not good. Folks on one side used to love Trump and also acknowledge the corruption, racism in Ukraine. Now would be that'd be a good meme. Yeah, no, it would be. I think if you if one could only make a meme of something like that, the blatant hypocrisy. I'm going to put this up here real quick, and I apologize. I've kind of just been reading through this. But when you look at it, no, there was a huge shift. It's crazy. If you go back and you look at 2014 all the way up to pretty much 2021, 2022, you saw all of the media talking heads talking about all of the corruption, the rise of Nazism and extremism over in Ukraine, and how unhinged and how out of pocket things are getting. Post 2022, it's a totally flipped script. The narrative is different, and it's like it never even happened. And I think that is absolutely insane. And what a meme that would be, sir. So I think that's a great point. Let's see here. Gene says, I wish we were looking out for Britain. It's more like looking out for every boat arriving alien. Well, I'm here to tell you, Gene, it seems like you have a pretty rabulous situation going on over there. And look, I'm here to tell you, I hope we start to see some changes coming out of that. And I hope that some things start to change. I know it seems like a long shot, but look, in the end of the day, each person has to be active. You have to be involved. And at times that does purport a great risk. But I think in the end of the day, liberty is always typically worth the risk that you're willing to put forward in order to keep it. And look, rights not exercised are rights not kept. And I think when we look at Europe, they are in a very particular situation, if you will, right? And it's particular to each and every country. But I think it's there. I think there is a glimmer of hope. And I hope that people in these European countries, I think they hope to start. I hope they start to see that, is what I'm trying to say. And I think some countries are coming around to it, slowly but surely. So don't give up hope, Gene, and don't give up the fight. Liberty requires you to be dutiful, and that means especially for us Americans. Let's see here. Looks like there's just a handful of comments left here. So glad you went there. The whole, if these things are meant to keep us safe, then why are comment? The money ball scene. If he's a good hitter, then why doesn't he hit well? Yeah, 100%. Yeah, well said, sir. Well said. I really appreciate that comment. We're doing it for your safety. Whoops. We are doing it for your safety, said everyone doing it for some other reason. 100%. It's one of the timeless excuses that they always like to put forth. Learn me something. Great presentation, Redbeard. Hey, learn me something. Great to have you in here, brother. Thank you so much. I hope that I was able to hit home with that. Let's see here. A great show for tonight. Very interesting, truthful, even for a Brit. We could learn a lot. Well, Gene, I'm here to tell you the American experience, the American foundation, it started with people from over in your neck of the woods. So they learned a thing or two from Britain, and they also learned from the 5 documents that were fundamental in creating our Constitution, because they started to pave the path to more and more liberty. So you have a rich history. I always say this. You have a rich history over in the UK and in Britain for rebellion, and I hope you guys find that rebellious spirit. I really, really do. Yep, the upcoming fight is designed to drag us into 100%. Absolutely. This has always been the ambition, whether it's Ukraine, Israel, whomever. It's always been the standard maxim anytime that we look at entangling alliances. So, well, I just want to say I really appreciate everybody coming out. Thank you for the great comments. Thank you for taking time out of your day to tune in to the Sentinels of Liberty podcast. I hope you got a lot out of the presentation and what it is that I was able to try and put forth. Presentation, well, show, whatever you want to call it. I hope you guys and gals were able to get something out of it, and you were able to have some takeaways that maybe you can put in your hip pocket the next time you have this conversation with somebody, and that there were some usable points to articulate, a response, or be able to defend why we shouldn't be in entanglements and entangling alliances. So with that being said, thank you everybody for coming out. Make sure to tune in on Saturday. Now, Saturday is going to be a slightly different time. It's going to be at 1500 Central Time. It's going to be at 3 p.m. Central Time instead of the standard 1700. And that was just something I worked out with my guest TC. It works out a little bit for him. And I have a little bit more flexibility on Saturdays. So I really hope to see you all there. It should be a pretty invigorating and intense conversation. So make sure to stop by, check that out. And next Thursday at 1800, I have Scott Horton coming back. I hope you all join me for that show as well. It should be another fantastic show. I really, really look forward to having Scott back on. I'm really looking forward to being able to allow him to come in and drop names and dates the way that he always does, and be able to add his perspective to the NATO conversation, Russia, Ukraine, and for some of you who might have seen that thumbnail, the future of the American empire, because make no mistake about it, people, America has become an empire. And so we need to examine it from a little bit of a different perspective here. Okay. So I hope to see you all there. Look forward to seeing you on Saturday. Thank you for your patronage and your continued support. Like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. And we will see you all on the next one. Thank you so much. God bless. Stay vigilant.
Steel-clad fist, rise in the dark. Shattered chains ignite the spark. Tyrants crumble, feel the flame. Settle strike and freedom snare.